Today, you'll discover which exercise intensity burns the most fat. If you're a follower of this channel, I'm sure you stick strictly to the workout routine. My followers are like that. But even so, you've been looking at yourself in the mirror for a while and that belly fat is still there. And the worst part is that year after year, you see your arms and legs getting thinner. Where is that muscle going? Why isn't training improving my body composition? The key is in the word intensity. Today, we're going to break the myth that after 50, you can only do light cardio because your joints can't handle more. And along the way, we'll see which workout burns more fat and less muscle. Here is Dr. Borja Bandera, a medical specialist in endocrinology and nutrition. And today, relying on this recent study, very recent, we're going to find out what exercise intensity makes you lose more fat in less time and with less muscle loss. Let's get started. At 50, your body is very different than at 20. And I'm not talking about gray hair precisely. As the years go by, you gain fat and lose muscle at a rate of 1 to 2% per year if you don't do anything. Yes, I know you do a lot. But does this get you closer? Well, it leads to a nightmare, sarcopenia. Sarcopenia is the price that time makes you pay if you don't do something about it. Sarcopenia means less muscle mass and function. You might think this is an effect limited to the muscle, but it's not. Not taking care of your muscles means speeding up disease in all your tissues, and of course speeding up the aging of all your tissues. Look, sarcopenia means a brain that thinks worse because you produce less brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a super important molecular brain fertilizer. Second, defective glucose uptake. 8 out of every 10 glucose molecules are metabolically handled by your muscles. Think about that. A heart that pumps worse. More kidney deterioration. A more permeable digestive system. And yes, of course, remember this well. Muscle is your main passive fat burner. Less muscle means burning less fat while you sleep, while you walk, while you work, while you pay bills. On the other hand, as you age, your body doesn't handle carbohydrates as well. And that energy tends to be stored in your organs, creating abdominal fat, which is inflammatory and dangerous for your heart. But of course, until you retire, you have a lot of responsibilities. Work, family, bills, children, maybe even grandchildren, and you want things to change. Every minute you spend truly exercising gives you the greatest benefit, the highest possible return. Isn't that right? Of course, that's what we all want. So, knowing that losing fat is something you achieve mostly through nutrition, because this needs to be absolutely clear, you don't train to lose fat, you eat to lose fat. Get that into your head. Knowing that, what exercise makes you lose the most fat per unit of time invested? Walking for an hour at a leisurely pace, or going to the gym without a plan? The truth is, they're not good options. You already know that. The traditional answer here is to do light cardio in zone 2, because of course that's physiologically where the most fat is oxidized. And that's true. The fat max zone happens at a low intensity that's usually in that zone 2. But it's also incomplete, because the body doesn't work in a linear way. We're not mathematics, we're a complex system. At the end of the video, I'll also share with you my favorite combination for losing fat, and the one that has kept me, without counting calories, at no more than 13 to 14% body fat for many years. But let's get to the data. A recent study analyzed a group of participants between 65 and 85 years old people like you, with their aches, with their limitations, with their lives, with their worries. They divided them into 3 interventions over 6 months. The first group did a high-intensity interval training workout of 4 blocks, each 4 minutes long, at an intensity between 85 and 95% of their maximum heart rate. Yes, giving it almost everything. Poor group. The second group worked at a moderate intensity, 30 minutes at 60 to 70% of their maximum heart rate. A gentle jog, like always. And the third group was the control group. And what they did was low-intensity stretching at 45-55% of their maximum heart rate. Well, they did 3 supervised sessions a week for 6 months, and something that stands out is the adherence in this study. They say it was 99%. That's amazing. I have to see it to believe it, but okay, I believe it. So what happened after 6 months when they gave the individuals a dual energy X-ray absorptiometry scan to measure their body composition? Well, both exercise groups, high-intensity interval training and moderate intensity, lost fat. No surprise there, right? Moving works. Did they lose a lot? No. In fact, to me, it's not a clinically relevant loss. On average, they lost about half a kilo to a kilo. Wow, that's a huge amount of fat, right? When we say that an intervention is clinically relevant, it means it produces changes in the body that translate into clinical improvements. It improves a patient's lab results, reduces pain, or improves something the doctor notices when sitting with the patient in the office. To achieve fat loss that brings health benefits, we should aim to lose at least 5 to 10% of the initial body weight and reduce body fat percentage by at least 3 to 4%. And you might say, Borja, what a study, right? So what does this study contribute? Well, the most valuable piece of information from this study for me is the following. The group that best preserved and even increased lean mass was the high-intensity interval training group, the high-intensity group. Losing the same amount of fat, they preserved more muscle without doing additional strength training, okay? This is important. Why does this happen? This is where it gets interesting. Let me explain the physiology behind this, and this is what might make you change the way you train as soon as tomorrow. Look. Why does high-intensity exercise preserve more muscle after 50? Well, because physiology isn't linear, it's a dynamic system. Even though at lower intensities, where that fat max is found, theoretically more fat is oxidized, high intensity changes your metabolism in 4 ways. First, and this is something that's known but rarely explained, it controls your appetite better. This is a reality you've experienced. An hour of light cardio is comfortable. You can chat with friends, have fun, and socialize. But when you get home, you want to eat everything in the fridge. You burn 600 calories and eat 800. However, high-intensity exercise is different. You come back from your hour of CrossFit or your interval training and your appetite signals, like ghrelin, are suppressed. Also, it's an effect that lasts for 1 or 2 hours after you finish. If you train at 7, you won't be able to eat at 7:30 or 8. The result is that if you include it in your routine, your calorie intake will be lower in the long run. But be careful, we also burn fewer calories in the short term with high-intensity exercise. One day won't make a difference, but a year will. When I say we burn fewer calories, I mean that we usually train for less time at high intensity. Per minute of high intensity burns more compared to a minute of low intensity, okay? Second, with equal duration, high intensity burns more calories. That's exactly what I just said. Even during the rest periods between sets, you're burning a lot of calories. Third, it activates different metabolic switches. Key. Of course, this is the key to the matter. When you do light cardio, you activate AMPK, which is vital for your mitochondria. But when you do intense effort, you trigger mTOR. This is the signal that tells your body, we need to keep this muscle because the effort is great. That's why muscle protein synthesis is higher after high-intensity exercise. That is, high-intensity interval training generates a subsequent anabolic stimulus, while low-intensity does not. And fourth, also key, it preserves fast fibers, type 2 fibers. Felipe Isidro says that aging is losing speed, and that's absolutely true. As we age, the first fibers to die are the fast ones, the power fibers. Light cardio doesn't affect them, only intense exercise does. Let's say that in terms of nervous recruitment, high-intensity interval training is halfway between light aerobic exercise, zone 2, and strength training. Why? Because it requires a large recruitment of fast-twitch motor units, the first ones you lose as you get older. Now let's move on to practice. What should you do if your goal is to maximize fat loss through training? Well, my recommendation here is to do both high and low intensity, but together. Let me explain. My favorite combo for losing fat. You might say, Borja, so do I always have to train at maximum intensity? No. In fact, that would be a mistake. It would fry your nervous system and increase your risk of injury. You need to train for a very short time at very high intensities compared to the total. The rest should be at low or moderate intensities. My favorite combination is the so-called polarized training, but using sprints and zone 1 or 2 times a week whenever travel allows me. Lately, this has been complicated. I go out to do sprint intervals of no more than 20 seconds in duration. I cover between 140 and 160 meters in this time. The recovery between sprints should be sufficient, with a ratio of at least 1:6 effort to rest ratio. If you sprint for 10 seconds, you should rest at least 1 minute. This is extremely important. You can't start the next set fatigued. In order to reach maximum intensity, your nervous system needs to recover completely. Now make sure the intensity is at its maximum. Once you've warmed up, your muscles are ready. And most importantly, you're coming in trained, go all out on the sprint. The sprint has to be a maximum effort. You can't hold anything back. This stimulus is very powerful for mobilizing fat. the famous lipolysis, but I like to combine it with aerobic-based training, and many times I combine them in the same session. Let me tell you why. What I do is accumulate minutes of cardio after the sets, where you can maintain a fluent conversation. This way I get two benefits. I oxidize the fat that I mobilized through the high intensity during the sprints, and I increase mitochondrial density and number. This increases my oxidative machinery. If you only do zone training, it will be hard for you to mobilize stubborn fat because it requires a higher adrenergic stimulus due to the resistance of the receptors in those stubborn fat areas, like the lower abdomen. But if you only do sprints, you also need the mitochondria to consume the mobilized fat. Together, they are a very good combination. So once or twice a week, I go to my sprint zone, where I do my 10-12 sprints or sets at different distances depending on my sports goal. Sometimes they're sets of 200, other times they're 400, and sometimes they're 100-meter sprints. And then I calmly go back home in Zone 2, trying to accumulate at least 40-45 minutes of Zone 2 per session. To this, of course, I add strength training sessions on separate days which are non-negotiable. And it's really hard not to be in shape if you stick to this routine, really hard. So let's be sensible. Don't start tomorrow doing 100-meter sprints as if you were Usain Bolt. Your heart, your muscles, your tendons need to adapt. I've seen a lot of muscle injuries from doing this. Gradually introduce intensity. You'll sprint for 5 seconds, then 10, 15, and 20. But the message, is simple. Don't settle for just taking it easy. Your body is an incredible adaptation machine, even at 50 or 60 years old. Although nutrition is what will give you the desired body fat percentage, exercise is a very good complement. Now, the ingredient that will determine whether you become a frail senior or a vital, strong, and metabolically protected one. What is it? The intensity of that exercise. In fact, this intensity is precisely one of the best predictors of the mortality benefits of exercise. If you found this video helpful, subscribe and share it with that friend who spends hours on the treadmill and doesn't see many results. Let's change your generation's health video by video. I'll see you in the next one. A big hug and keep empowering yourself.